For all its beauty and splendor, the wilderness can be a cruel teacher. From the Sahara to Death Valley, the desert is home to some of the most beautiful, otherworldly scenery on the planet. But it's also one of the Earth's harshest environments. Lack of water, extreme heat, and rugged, occasionally disorienting terrain can put the unprepared in a dangerous situation. Click the subscribe and like buttons. This is Outdoor Disasters. Stark in appearance and haunting in name, Death Valley is a very much alive desert. The name doesn't do justice to the vibrancy of Death Valley. The mysteries of the life sustained in this arid and isolated landscape capture the attention of people from around the world. Death Valley is a vast national park with over 3 million acres of designated wilderness and hundreds of miles of backcountry roads. The park contains an amazing variety of terrain, historic sites, plants, and animals for outdoor adventurers to discover on foot, by bike, or in your car. America's lowest, hottest, and driest national park, adventurous visitors enjoy Death Valley for its many extremes and mysteries, such as the sailing stones. From the magical burst of wildflower blooms in spring to the allure of ghost towns, historic mining operations, wildlife, and raw natural beauty, Death Valley National Park offers something for everyone. For one German family, Death Valley would be their final resting place. On the morning of October 21st, 1996, a Death Valley ranger was scouring the desert during routine aerial surveillance looking for drug labs in the backcountry. Around 11 a.m., he saw something unexpected, a vehicle in the wash of Anvil Canyon, approximately 2 miles downstream from Willow Spring, the head of Anvil Canyon. This was extremely odd for several reasons. There wasn't a real or legal road down Anvil Canyon any longer. The second piece of oddness was that the vehicle appeared to be a standard passenger van. While Anvil Canyon could still be traversed by a competent four-wheel drive vehicle, a two-wheeled passenger van was totally inappropriate and couldn't be expected to get far in that canyon. It was a green, 1996 Plymouth Voyager van with California license plates. It was covered with considerable dust, as if it had been out there for some time. The van was clearly stuck in the wash, sunk up to its axles in the sand, with its 2 rear tires flattened and its left front tire also flat. Tracks left in the sand by the van suggested it had been driven at least 200 feet with flat rear tires. The van was locked, with no sign of the owner. The ranger noted the license number and reported it back to the Death Valley headquarters. A quick check on the license plate with the California Highway Patrol revealed the vehicle was reported stolen by the Los Angeles Police Department on September 10, 1996. This was the beginning of an intense investigation and search for the owner of the vehicle. The vehicle, owned by Dollar Rent-A-Car, had been rented to a group of 4 German tourists in Los Angeles on July 8, 1996. The vehicle had been due back to the rental agency in Los Angeles on July 26th, but had never been returned. Heike Weber had reported her ex-husband, Egbert Rimkus, 34, and their son, Georg, 11, missing. They traveled with Egbert's girlfriend, Cornelia Meyer, 28, and her 4-year-old son, Max. They rented the minivan in Cornelia's name on July 8, 1996, after flying from Germany to Seattle and then to LA. They missed their flight from San Francisco back to Germany on July 26th. Investigators now knew who to look for. After searching the minivan and finding numerous items to investigate their whereabouts before, and possibly after they abandoned the minivan, they explored San Clemente, where the family had stayed, and the California coast, where they were planning to be. At some point, Egbert had $1,500 wired from his bank. Then they went to Las Vegas, where they stayed at the Treasure Island Resort. At this point, Egbert reached out to his ex-wife to borrow money, but she did not loan him any. On July 22nd, they continued on to Death Valley. Receipt records at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center show that on July 22nd, 2 copies of Death Valley National Monument Museum in German were sold. Egbert, Cornelia, Georg, and Max were never seen again. The recorded temperatures for the known dates of their visit to Death Valley were 124 degrees. The temps in Anvil Canyon were cooler due to the higher elevation, but the area is remote and all of Death Valley is unforgiving, so the temperature difference likely didn't matter much. They were stranded with a limited amount of supplies in a foreign country, in an environment that not many, if any, would go out into willingly. A search and discovery began for the bodies. 2 miles east of the car in Anvil Canyon, one Bud Ice beer bottle was found in the sand next to a bush with what looked to be a mark where somebody had sat. Day 2 of the search, October 24th, brought additional teams and expanded the search area. Areas searched this day included more of Anvil Canyon, portions of Warm Spring Road and Butte Valley, Mengle Pass, the area adjacent to Warm Spring Road between the canyon mouth and West Side Road, and from the van location easterly to the head of Anvil Canyon at Willow Spring. There were also 2 helicopters involved this day, both for searching and shuttling supplies and searchers. There were 2 more days of searching the surrounding area before the search was eventually called off, and the family was presumed dead. Some German canteens had also been found 3 miles southeast of the van, but the exact location couldn't be determined, as the person who retrieved them never returned calls when contacted. This was truly a massive search performed by very competent search teams. There were over 45 searchers in the field and 2 helicopters in the air at any given time and 8 horses on the ground. It was estimated by a Death Valley spokesperson that 250 people were involved in the search at one time or another. Time went on, and formal searches ceased. The mystery of the Death Valley Germans became a phenomenon on the internet, and numerous theories were formulated by independent sleuths. The most popular theory was the Germans staged the incident to disappear and start new lives. This was given some momentum by Egbert's ex-wife, saying there were custody issues with their son. Also, co-workers of Egbert stated he talked about moving to Costa Rica, but staging a disappearance in a dangerous and remote environment like Death Valley in summer seemed highly unlikely. Further, Cornelia had a thriving business back in Germany and had no reason to disappear. Many believed there was a criminal element behind their disappearance, but Egbert's bank cards were left in the van and not taken. No activity was ever recorded on Cornelia's cards. The van, being the most valuable item, was abandoned and left locked, and no other vehicle tracks were seen, which rules out criminality. Online sleuths suspected they were German spies looking to infiltrate the China Lake Naval Weapons Center nearby. Even alien abductions were on the table. However, in 2009, search and rescuer Tom Mahood became intrigued by the story of the Death Valley Germans before joining the Riverside Mountain Rescue Unit in February of that year. To receive more training, Mahood took a course in man tracking in September 2009, which involves learning to follow the tracks of people rather than animals. The course would be headed by China Lake Mountain Rescue Group in the Death Valley area, which was involved in the search back in 1996. This was a great opportunity to ask more about the Germans' case. The missing Germans struck me as a case that simply had to have more to it, Tom stated. After pulling some strings and getting some detailed evidence and information from the investigation, he possessed all the information he was likely to obtain for the case. It was now time to head into the field and investigate. On Tuesday, October 27, 2009, Tom Mahood started his field investigation. The first field recon was a solo trek. With the GPS coordinates, he made it to the van's location. He marked off the approximate outline of the van with flags and took photos to match those in the Death Valley investigators' report. As I climbed up on the bank of the wash to the south to take overall pictures, it suddenly struck me that Egbert probably did the same thing and was at the same spot on the bank to get an overview of where they were. It was a very eerie feeling, Tom stated. He hiked around the area, coming upon the bush where the beer bottle was found. Covering a total of just over 12 miles that day, he explored numerous landmarks and tried to put himself in the mind of Egbert and what led him astray. 2 days after his trek, as Tom was looking over a map of Death Valley at home, Mahood had an epiphany. I suddenly saw a way the Germans could have ended up in Anvil Canyon through a series of reasonable, honest mistakes, and why they might have set out for the south. I was also acutely aware that I might have done exactly the same thing were I in their situation. Is this in fact what happened? No one can know for sure, but it offered an explanation for their apparent actions and fits the known facts of the incident very well, he stated. Tom Mahood concocted a theory of what happened to the Germans that led to their death. This theory would lead Tom to search in areas that were ignored in 1996. Their rental van was due back in Los Angeles on July 26th, and they were returning to Germany the next day, the 27th. They may have been low on funds. The official reports indicate Egbert had some trouble getting money transferred to him earlier in the trip. He later requested additional money from his ex-wife in Las Vegas. This didn't occur, so money was perhaps an issue as they planned to travel to Yosemite via Death Valley. Arriving at the Death Valley Visitor Center on the 22nd, they may have been looking for a route to see interesting sights in the valley, with the ultimate goal being Yosemite. The Germans knew that with valley floor temperatures reaching 124 degrees Fahrenheit, they couldn't camp in the main valley, and with low funds, renting a room at Furnace Creek was out of the question. Hot weather camping could be tolerable in higher elevations, which would explain their choice of traveling on West Side Road. The maps they had available to them showed a route to the west, via Butte Valley and Mengel Pass, then north to the ghost town of Ballarat, and on to Yosemite. They weren't familiar with how rugged Death Valley roads in the backcountry could be, but understandable for them to believe they could do it. The Germans camped at Hanaupa Canyon on the night of July 22nd. They would have successfully navigated a considerable number of dirt road miles on West Side Road, which may have lowered their guard as to potential hazards. They also made it up Hanaupa Canyon in a two-wheeled minivan, which may have further bolstered their confidence in backcountry traveling. And they had 3 nights left before they had to be in Los Angeles. Just enough time for a quick trip through Yosemite, which they may have expected to reach by the next night, the 23rd. So early on the morning of the 23rd, to beat the heat, Egbert, Cornelia, and the kids left Hanaupa Canyon and continued south to Warm Spring Road and turned west. They would have experienced a very fine dirt road at that point, validating their overall plan. Reaching the Warm Spring camp, they hear hoping for some signs of life and get an idea of the road conditions further down the road. The camp was deserted, so they signed the register, indicating they were going over Mengel Pass. Continuing westerly toward Butte Valley, they encountered their first sections of truly questionable two-wheel drive road. By now, they would have invested considerable time getting in there. Thus, the pressure to continue westward would have mounted, so they chose to risk driving on the road. Coming upon the geologist cabin, it was deserted as well. They decided to take the USA flag from the cabin and continued on. As they approached Mengel Pass, it was obvious this was a four-wheel overland vehicle road, and their Plymouth minivan was incapable of traversing this track. They had to turn back. A dilemma now loomed. At this point, it was probably late afternoon. Going back through Warm Spring Road, it would have taken at least 2 hours for them to return to the paved road in the valley, and it was going in the opposite direction where they needed to be. They wanted to see Yosemite and be in LA on the 26th. The treacherous road between Butte Valley and Warm Springs they just traversed was likely a battle they didn't want to revisit. Egbert likely saw another route on the map, which would be a shorter route back down to the valley in the form of a road down Anvil Canyon. This will show to be a deadly mistake. So the Germans returned to the intersection at the geologist's cabin and turned right onto Anvil Canyon Road. The turn onto Anvil Canyon Road was likely premeditated and reasoned. The first couple miles down the road is drivable, along with sections inside the canyon, but the roads would turn harsh quickly. Egbert, seeing the road was more treacherous and the possibility of getting stuck was high, plus they need to get back to the main road, was driving faster than the minivan could handle with its low clearance. The rear tires explode, but he's still moving. Stopping at this point would guarantee being stuck in the backcountry. Egbert misjudged a fork in the road and went right when the road in fact veered left, heading toward the sandy wash. He tries to cut back left to join the main road, but the minivan comes to a halt, stuck in the gravelly sand of the wash inside Anvil Canyon. With temperatures in the hundreds and miles from civilization, they were in dire straits. In the middle of Death Valley backcountry, with a busted rental, limited rations, with kids in tow, and only days away from their flight back to Germany. Evidence suggests Egbert, seeing that they were in serious trouble, decided to make a trek to see if there were any signs of life down Anvil Canyon Road. With the sun bearing down on him, Egbert drinks a beer under a bush, providing shade during the very late afternoon. From this location is possible to see easterly down the canyon to the mouth of Anvil Canyon, and all the way to the east side of the main valley where the paved Badwater Road 16 miles away. This is when Egbert likely comes up with an extraction plan. Stranded in an area they haven't seen another human being for days, and were in need of assistance to extract their rental, the Germans were growing concerned. They had to make the flight in a few days. In examining their maps, Ballarat was many miles away, and with unknown services. Furnace Creek, the center of Death Valley, was way too far on foot. Heading down to Badwater Road on the valley's east side was in the area of the valley's legendary lethal heat. But there was another possibility. The Germans had likely seen many military installations in Europe, and they had certain commonalities. They all had fences that were regularly patrolled by armed personnel. The likelihood of patrols at the edge of a military installation would have seemed quite high. Egbert, looking at the maps available to him, would have seen the northern boundary of the China Lake Naval Weapons Center to be only about 9 miles to the south of them. Looking to the south shows what appears to be a simple traversable route south, up over a low pass in the mountains. Egbert believes this is a great plan, getting to the safety of a military installation and not descending down below sea level. The depth and shape of Death Valley influence its extreme heat. The valley is a long, narrow basin, 282 feet below sea level, yet is walled by high, steep mountain ranges. The clear, dry air and sparse plant cover allow sunlight to heat the desert surface. Heat radiates back from the rocks and soil, then becomes trapped in the valley's depths. Heated air rises, cools before it can rise over the valley's mountain walls, and is recycled back down to the valley floor. These pockets of descending air are only slightly cooler than the surrounding hot air. As they descend, they are compressed and heated even more by the low elevation air pressure. These moving masses of superheated air blow through the valley, creating extremely high temperatures. What Egbert didn't know was U.S. desert military installations are seldom manned by military personnel. Security is provided more by vastness rather than fencing. After formulating his plan at the bush, Egbert headed back to the van. The group then probably spent the night at the van, and then early the next morning locked the vehicle and headed east down Anvil Canyon to a little past the Bottle Bush, then turned south toward the China Lake Naval Base boundary in the hope of rescue. The right option was probably heading back to the geologist's cabin for water and shelter. But the Germans had to get back for their flight, and there was no guarantee of receiving help in time. So heading to the military installation seemed to be the best option for the quickest extraction. So Egbert Rimkus, his son Georg, Cornelia Meyer, and 4-year-old Max set off down the canyon road to their impending doom. With this plausible theory in mind, on November 11, 2009, Tom Mahood and friend and colleague Les Walker went searching for the German family and set out to Death Valley that morning. From the Bottle Bush, they headed south in the direction Tom believed the German may have trekked. With no luck the first night, they camped and spent a cold night in Death Valley. Early that morning, they woke up and decided to split up to cover more area, keeping in contact via radio. Sometime later, Les contacts Tom to inform him he found a wine bottle. Then he radios again to inform him he found a piece of a daily planner in German. As he arrives at the scene, Mahood clearly sees skeletal remains. Les finds Cornelia's wallet. Upon further search, they found more bits of a daily planner in German as well as business cards from places that they had visited on their trip to the States. They found one empty bottle that, when formally collected and investigated, was determined to match the other bottles investigators found back at the minivan in 1996. They knew this was enough to give to authorities, so they rushed back to the truck and floored it back to Furnace Creek before it closed at 5 p.m. They reached their destination and informed authorities of what they found. They brought Cornelia's wallet with them as confirmation. They were put on the phone with an Inyo County Sheriff's Office investigator to answer some questions, and were requested to stay overnight to aid investigators in the morning. The next day, they were directed to an airfield where Inyo search and rescue personnel, officers from the Inyo County Sheriff's Office, an FBI agent, and a Seahawk helicopter were awaiting them. They flew to the site where authorities collected the evidence at the site. Later on, after DNA analysis of the skeletal remains, they were able to ID Egbert and Cornelia. On December 6, 2010, Inyo County sheriffs found remains that seemed to be of a child or children, as well as some small shoes, but not enough DNA to positively connect them with the children. The case was essentially closed, and the fate of the Germans was put to rest. The following theory is a hypothetical scenario of how the Germans' last days may have gone, making the trek south of the van toward the military installation. What was thought to be a somewhat easy hike is not the case. They're higher in elevation, but it is still a scorching 100 degrees with no shade from the Death Valley sun. Kids suffer from the heat faster than adults, so it's really taking its toll on Georg and Max. They can't go on any longer. Egbert, seeing his family suffering, sees a small bluff up ahead. They walk towards the bluff and settle down. The small overhang provides some relief from the beating sun, but it's still hot, and they had nothing but alcohol, a few snacks, and a couple of bottles of water. Egbert tells Cornelia he's going to the military installation, and for them to stay put, and he'll be back with help. Although he's exhausted, the rest and shade help some. He drinks a beer and continues the next 4 miles to the base. Egbert arrives at the military installation and sees no one is around. Devastated, Egbert turns around and arrives back at the bluff to see his family in despair. But he's way too exhausted to go anywhere and flops down next to them. So the family settles down for the night, hoping that rescue may come. But they're in a remote part of the valley where traffic is rare. Egbert knew unless a plane flies over or maybe an off-roader comes by, the chances of rescue were slim. No one knew where they were. Max was not in good shape. While deserts are notorious for cold nights, a summer in Death Valley sees only a drop into the mid-80s during the night. As the sun arises, comes the extreme heat as well. Egbert and Cornelia give all the rations and the rest of the water to the children, but it's not enough. They now only have wine to drink. The children may not make it through the day if a rescue does not come. The butte only provides some relief for part of the day, so the sun is bearing down on the family. The first stage of hyperthermia begins. Sweating can no longer keep their bodies at a manageable temperature, then heat cramps. When sweating ceases, bodies start to swell and muscles start to seize. For Max and Georg, the process to die of heat stroke is snowballing more quickly than for Egbert and Cornelia. Then heat exhaustion. You start to feel lethargic and cycle in and out of alertness. And last comes heat stroke. Cycling in and out of consciousness, there's often an altered mental state. At this point, some people are no longer aware they're in pain or discomfort. The cells in vital organs start to swell, they burst and die. Infants and children up to 4 years of age and the elderly 65 years of age and older are the most vulnerable to heat-related illness. This process happens quickly, sometimes within 2 or 3 hours. The first one to perish is Max. Cornelia is devastated and Egbert is rife with guilt and shame. It was his idea to take this route, and now Cornelia's son is dead. With any energy they had, they dug out a small grave, not too deep because they were exhausted, and buried Max. Egbert is now worried about Georg. He's 11, so hasn't succumbed yet, but he's not looking good. The night comes and Egbert and Cornelia do everything to comfort him, but they know this may be their final hours. The three make it through the night, but the heat does not let up. All of them are suffering, looking for anywhere to lie down away from the sun. Georg has now passed on. Egbert, with the last of his energy, grabs his son and apologizes. Egbert has now lost all will to live. Since he used a lot of energy to go to the military installation and gave most of the rations to the others, he's now on his last legs. Hours later, Egbert passes on as well. Now Cornelia is left alone. She's laying down and doesn't have the energy to react to Egbert's passing. She knew she was next. It was still scorching, alone, with 3 dead bodies around her. With the unrelenting heat bearing down on her, Cornelia takes her last breath. With the evidence of the skeletal remains, along with the Mahood theory and no signs of foul play, it's the logical conclusion the Germans died of heat stroke under the small bluff. Likely they suffered for a few days after being stranded in Death Valley. The desert is a hostile and extreme environment, yet it attracts thousands of adventure seekers every year. Some pursue new challenges, while others are smitten with dunes, the stark simplicity of the desert landscape, the spectacularity of wildflowers blooming after a rainfall, breathtaking canyons, and incredible mountains. Whatever desert you plan to visit, You should have basic desert survival skills because accidents can happen anytime, anywhere, and to anyone. The biggest killer in any emergency situation is panic. Panic blinds a person to reason and can cause you to compound the emergency with fatal results. Controlling panic is a matter of focusing the mind and operating in an organized manner. The brain is by far the best survival tool we have. Survival is much more mental than physical exercise, and keeping control of the brain is necessary to make good decisions. Staying with your vehicle if you're stranded is your best option. Not only does it provide shelter from the elements, but you're likely to be seen from above. Deserts are defined by their lack of water. Learn to ration sweat, not water. By staying in the shade, limiting activity to cooler times such as night, and using your available water, your chances for survival increase greatly. Sipping water does not get it to the brain and vital organs. Take a good drink when you need it. People have been found dead from dehydration with water in their canteens. With cool desert nights, warmth is crucial. Fire not only provides this, but it can be used to signal for help, cook food, and purify water and psychological comfort. However, in hot climates, food is not as important as other factors. If water is in short supply, it is important not to eat anything because it increases your water needs to digest the food. Crucial survival tips so you can navigate an outdoor disaster.